Kathleen Kennedy is stepping down as Lucasfilm CEO, marking the end of an era.
The Emperor is dead!
But with her departure, one huge question remains. Who takes over, and what does this mean for Star Wars? With the franchise already facing uncertainty, this could lead to some of the biggest changes we've seen in years.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And while she's never been the most popular figure among fans, replacing her won't be as simple as it sounds. So who's actually the right person for the job, and will this shake-up completely change the future of that galaxy far, far away?
Great care we must take.
Before we jump in, don't forget to leave a thumbs up on today's video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to catch more of a Star Wars coverage, you're in the right place. Now, without further ado, let's jump in on the Kathleen Kennedy situation and what's next for Star Wars.
As you can see, this is a new era for Star Wars and Lucasfilm. It's clear that we need great storytelling and the joy of entertainment more than ever before.
So essentially, there was a report that came out a couple of days ago from Matthew Baloney at Pluck News, and it turns out, I guess you could say it's not a load of baloney because it's actually been picked up by the Hollywood trades as well. And it essentially says that Kathleen Kennedy's gonna retire by the end of 2025. Now, it doesn't say at the end of 2025, it says by. So that could be any time from next week, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. I think it really comes down to essentially when they end up getting a replacement in for her. So she's not going to be like holding on for that big New Year's Eve party and leaving with the fireworks exploding. Now, initially, I admit I was a bit skeptical when I found out about this because, you know, we sort of hear this rumor every single year, pretty much, I think, to the month as well. It's usually just before we enter spring, we get that Kathleen Kennedy's been fired thumbnail pop up on our timeline, and we get various articles that are just copying that one video or vice versa. You know the thumbnails I'm on about with the red glowing eyes and whatnot. But it doesn't actually seem like that is the case this time, you know, like eventually they were all going to be right. Kathleen Kennedy, she's 72 years old. She's no spring chicken now, bless her. So eventually she was always going to retire, and maybe that time is now. Like, this woman, from the career she's had already, is incredibly wealthy. And let's not forget, George Lucas, once upon a time, actually walked away from Star Wars himself because he wanted to spend time with his family. He realised he wasn't getting any younger. So it could be the same situation right here. Now, I must admit, one thing didn't make a whole lot of sense to me initially, and that was, why was she leaving now? Why was she calling it a day in 2025 when you've got Andor Season 2 coming out, when the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, by all accounts, is already filmed, it's done, it's ready to go, and that's coming out in, what is it, May 2026. Why wouldn't you just hang around for that, and then she can ride off into the sunset after a big successful movie? Because, I mean, let's be honest, the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, I think it's going to do pretty well. But then it kind of dawned on me, well, she actually worked on that movie anyway, didn't she? So her credit is going to be given to her for that movie, regardless if she's still with Lucasfilm or not. And there is an element of this where I think maybe it wasn't totally her decision. You know, like, someone of Kathleen Kennedy's stature in the industry, despite what you'd read online and maybe other videos you've watched and the rest of it, she's never going to be fired, right? So she's massively successful. We'll get onto that in a moment. But she's too big at this point, I feel, in her career for someone to go into her desk on Monday morning before she comes in, pack up all of her belongings out of the desk and leave them in a big box on the desk that reads "fired" on the front of it. Like, she's too big for that. If anything, and this could be what happened, someone's, maybe Bob Iger, someone high up at Disney, has came in, they've sat down with her and they've said, like, look, things aren't going great for Star Wars, for Lucasfilm even, for Disney, and even for yourself, you know, like you literally get heckled by fans pretty much every day, and you've even become a parody on South Park. That's not something to be proud of.
Put another gay diverse woman in it, make it more fucking lame!
Maybe they've came in, they sat down and they said to her, look, maybe it's time we go our separate ways. Maybe they did it in a professional way, of course. Will they make it feel like she's leaving on her terms and they're just nudging her in that direction? Effectively, like, managing her out? I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that's came of it. But she's definitely not came into her desk on Monday morning and found a box of belongings sitting there. Now, before we dive in on who could possibly be replacing her, because there's a few names that have appeared a few times in different reports from reliable sources as well, so we should really take them into consideration. But before we do that, we should probably take a step back and look at the resume that would genuinely land someone a job of the CEO of Lucasfilm. And I mean, let's look at Kathleen Kennedy's to start with. when she came in to help George all those years ago, and then eventually took the big seat herself. So apparently she started off as someone called John Milius, I had to read that and double check that, their assistant, and then she went on to become Steven Spielberg's secretary. And then she moved on to producing, where her name was behind many of the big shows that me and you would have enjoyed growing up, such as like E.T., Back to the Future, there's a couple of Indiana Jones movies in there as well, Jurassic Park, big stuff that really stands the test of time, and you go back and you watch them now. And then, of course, outside of that, she also run multiple businesses, her own businesses. So that showed Lucasfilm early on that she already had that business sense about her. She had experience running a corporation, and that was massively handy for a role of Lucasfilm stature. And then, of course, once George Lucas retired from making, movies that me and you were going to see, I mean, apparently he's made some behind the scenes that I'd love to actually watch, but we're probably never gonna. But once he was gone and Disney took over Star Wars, Kathleen Kennedy was responsible, and she was the one behind the sequel trilogy, which, regardless if you liked it or not, was a huge financial success. Like, The Force Awakens, grossed over, $2 billion, and then you've got the following two films, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. They both got over $1 billion each. Altogether, the whole trilogy got over $4 billion, which is massive. Now, beneath that, you also had some L's in there as well. You had Solo, the first Star Wars movie in history that actually lost money. And some of these projects, the films, the fans weren't all on board for, especially the last two in the sequel trilogy. But we did get, when The Force Awakens came out, pretty much everyone I spoke to loved that movie. And then it was followed on by Rogue One, which to this day is probably the best Star Wars Disney movie that they've done. So there's been some wins. There's also been some L's. And that's partially the reason that we're sat here talking about this today. But the role itself, the job of being CEO of a company like Lucasfilm, it's not what you might think. It's not totally creative. In fact, mostly it's corporate. You're going to have a lot of boardroom meetings where you're dealing with licensing, or you're dealing with Lego and all this kind of shenanigans, which you wouldn't really associate with the role, but it's actually there. A lot of Star Wars creatives out there, it's going to be pretty obvious. A lot of them aren't going to want that job. They're creative by nature. That's their passion. And if they take a role up like this, they're essentially cutting that self off of them for their professional work in life. Which means if someone that got the job, let's say it was Dave Filoni, because that's the name that's popping up a lot now, and there's actually some reports going on to say that he's Disney's favourite to take up the role. If he lands it, they're probably going to pair that creative, similar to what they've done with DC. They're probably going to pair them with someone who is more experienced in the corporate side. So you'd have two people essentially running the company. You'll have, let's say it's Dave Filoni. You'll have him running the creative side of it, and then you'll have someone else running, the corporate side of it, doing all these boring meetings that Dave might not necessarily know too much about and be that interested in doing anyway. Now, there's a couple of names that have been spoke about for that, and obviously, if you remember last year, Dave Filoni had a promotion to the Chief Creative Officer role at Lucasfilm, which I think essentially would be what he would be doing if he got the CEO job. And he was promoted with someone called Carrie Beck as well, who, by all accounts, is more experienced in that kind of stuff. But then you've also got other people in there. There's someone called Linwin, I can't remember her last name, sorry. She's like the general manager of Lucasfilm. She's like the person that does all the corporate side. So there's a possibility that someone like her could be promoted with him, and it could be like a co-role where they work together. But this really is what makes choosing the next person to take over the CEO role of Lucasfilm so tricky. Who really is the right candidate? So we've already spoken about the possibility of Dave Filoni getting the role. And well, yeah, fans love him, but he's a storyteller first and foremost, not an executive. So it might not be ideal for him unless they do the kind of co-role where he splits it with someone who's more experienced in the other side of things. Now, of course, you've got Jon Favreau as well, which is another name that's been mentioned. I mean, that's also a possibility, and that would be my personal pick of the bunch, if I'm honest with you. Purely because of his experience, how long he's been around, it's outside of Star Wars for him as well. He's got experience over with Marvel. He was the one responsible for launching the MCU with the Iron Man movies, so that adds a lot of weight to it for me as well. But I think this one is a little bit of a tricky one to get done, especially if you're Bob Iger, because Jon Favreau, by all accounts, he had a 5-year contract with Disney overall, not just Star Wars, but also Disney, where you see him working in the MCU as well. And that banked him apparently over $125 million over that 5 years. The role of Lucasfilm CEO, he's going to be taking a pay cut. He's not going to be getting that level. So financially, maybe it wouldn't be the best decision for him to make for himself. And at least now he gets to remain 100% creative doing what he's doing now, which might not be the case if he gets the big job at Lucasfilm. And of course, if it's not going to be Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau, that means Bob Iger's going to be looking, for the most part, outside of Lucasfilm, perhaps for a more experienced executive elsewhere. I mean, let's not forget Kathleen Kennedy, when she got a job, she was only at Lucasfilm, I think it was like a year before George sold it, and then she took up the top job herself. So they could be going down that route. But this is where things get really interesting. Essentially, this change doesn't just boil down to replacing Kathleen Kennedy and someone else stepping in. It could actually change the whole direction that Star Wars has been crafting out these last few years. Like, if we want to look at just how much of a shake-up a new executive can take walking into a job like this, we don't actually have to look that far or that far back either. Like James Gunn, when he moved over to DC, he became the creative executive there. Now you've got Peter Safran, who runs like the corporate side of it, and he does the creative side, which I think is a split that you probably would see if a creative comes in for this role, like Dave or John or someone else. When he came in, he immediately said, look, this is a bit of a mess. I mean, it's a bit of a glum place to be around. And he just chopped a load of projects, and he changed multiple others as well. And he said, look, this is the plan, this is the outline. He had a clear structure for what they're going to do moving forwards. And since then, they've put out the Superman trailer. Now that on its own, huge success so far in terms of the trailer's views and the attention it's getting. So they've brought a lot of hype back to that franchise that wouldn't have necessarily been there if they didn't really take these steps to have a massive clear out, if you like. So we could see something similar like that happen with Star Wars as well. Just to be clear, unlike the DC, I don't think they're going to reboot Star Wars. Star Wars isn't really something you can do that to. The original 3 movies are iconic, and that really is what's made the franchise last, like the 40 plus years it has. It's them 3 movies, which allowed the prequels to be made, the sequels, the Disney Plus shows, the spin-off movies, and all of everything in between all started because them 3 movies were so good. So they're not going to reboot that like they would necessarily with other franchises. I think Star Wars is safe there. So in terms of current projects they got on the table and if they're safe or not, well, you know, Andor Season 2, that's going to be coming soon, so that's okay. Mandalorian and Grogu movie's done, that's just waiting to be released. Maybe that'll come out a little bit earlier now, who knows. Essentially, I feel like anything that goes into production before this new person comes in or gets a promotion will be okay. So you're looking at Ahsoka Season 2, maybe the Sean Levy Star Wars movie, if that goes into production as rumoured this year, like the James Mangold movie as well. Anything that doesn't, I feel like it has the potential to be scrapped still. So you could be looking at the multiple Ray projects they've got going on at the moment, the Simon Kinberg trilogy, the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie. I mean, you know how much Star Wars has going on in the pipeline. Whether we see any of it, whether we would have seen it under Kathleen Kennedy or not is a different story. But the ones that really don't get the ball rolling before someone else comes in, they're at a risk because someone's going to come in, they're going to have their own ideas on how they want to do things. And they're not going to want to spend 5 years of their tenure just literally following up what she set up. They're going to have their own clear ideas. And if they don't, that would be a little bit strange in itself. They're going to have to pitch to Bob Iger their plans for Lucasfilm before they get the job. And Bob Iger's going to have to go, yeah, actually, you know what? I like that. I like your vision. I trust you to do it. Here are the keys to the mansion. No one's going to walk in there and say, you know, I just want to carry on doing what you've been doing, because let's be honest, guys. Let's be absolutely honest here. Star Wars isn't where it was when Disney took it over back in 2012. So the idea is going to be to get back to that. And they're not going to do it by sticking to the same thing that they have been doing. And I feel part of what Bob Iger wants to do right now, and then we kind of seen it a little bit under Kathleen Kennedy's tenure as well in the last couple of years, they want to put more focus back on movies. You know, Star Wars has been out of cinemas since 2019, and they're getting back into it now with The Mandalorian and Grogu. And I think that is part of it, because that was going to be The Mandalorian Season 4. So anyone that steps up and takes this role, the mandate's going to be quite clear. You know, we're a movie company. We need to make movies, not just TV shows. So I feel like the direction that they need to go in moving forward is they need to have a clear idea of what they want to do on each front. With movies, I feel like they need to start a linear story and they need to see it through. So you've got The Mandalorian and Grogu coming out. Great. That's a good starting point. We know the Dave Filoni movie is going to be coming in a few years. If that's still the case, we'll have to see. but it should be, because that's going to lead on from The Mandalorian and Grogu, and then maybe another movie after that. Make it a trilogy, make it connected. Don't just have one movie set 20,000 years in the past and then the next one during the time of the Empire or the New Republic era, whatever. And they need to do something similar with Disney Plus. Now, in my opinion, the Disney Plus stuff should be unrelated to the movies. I feel part of what's hurt Star Wars and Marvel as well in recent years has been the fact that these Disney Plus shows plug into these movies and plug the gaps in between. I feel like that really does hurt the cinematic experience of it, because people will see a movie coming out and be like, oh, okay, well, I haven't watched the rest of it. And I know it's a little bit contradictory because that's kind of what The Mandalorian and Grogu is, but it depends how they market it and approach it as well. But going forward, they should just have the Disney Plus Star Wars stuff set in a complete different timeline, complete different story. This is Star Wars on TV, on streaming. We're following this story through from here to here. And then with the movies, this is something completely different. You don't have to watch the Disney Plus stuff to watch these movies. And hopefully that'll bring back that big event feel that Star Wars had when the sequel trilogy came out. Yeah, essentially, Kathleen Kennedy is going. Someone's going to be coming in at some point this year to take up the mantle. I feel like if it's going to be someone internal like John or Dave, then we'll probably know by Star Wars Celebration. That'd be a great time to announce it. And that could be like they can make that a big party for Kathleen Kennedy if that's what they want to do. If it's someone external, I feel like it'll be a little bit later than that. And that's why the report said she's going to retire by the end of 2025. So once they have, carried out their due diligence and looked around and they've got someone on board to be her replacement, then they'll bring that retirement announcement out. And that could be, as I say, 5 months, 6 months, 9 months from now. But once they do get that replacement, that's when it will happen. So what I really want to know is, who do you think should take over Lucasfilm? Do you have a preference? And out of all the projects they got going on right now and those in the pipeline, which do you think should be scrapped and which do you think they should stick with? As always, drop your thoughts, theories and wilder speculations down in the comments below. Let me know if you like this kind of video as well, more of an informal sit down in the comments too. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything upcoming from us. It's a pretty interesting time for Star Wars, so you don't want to miss out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and may the Force be with you.